Hello, welcome to Friday's edition of Cracking the Cryptic, and let us guide you through the self-isolation period with a puzzle from Phistomefel. Now, those of you new to the channel may not know the name Phistomefel, but he's one of the best puzzle setters in the world. Has been publishing puzzles on Logic Masters Germany since the start of the year. They always get over 90% rating because they're all awesome. And he published this one just a few days ago. It's a little killer Sudoku, so I'll talk you through the rules of this in a moment. A couple of things to mention though. We will be doing a second video today. I wasn't sure until about 10 minutes ago, but Mark has recorded a solve of a classic Sudoku, so that'll go out late UK time tonight. So that'll be our second video of the day. So hopefully you'll enjoy that. And also I want to mention puzzle hunts. Now, I sort of flagged this the other day, but Mark and I have been working hard on a puzzle hunt suitable for school children, and that is ready to go. So we'll probably launch that on Patreon tomorrow. I say on Patreon, it won't be behind the paywall, it'll be free. So if any of you have kids who might enjoy puzzling, I think it would be suitable for them. I think it's sort of teenagers type puzzle. Nothing monstrously difficult and a nice meta. Now, the other thing that we've been looking at is an adult puzzle hunt. And our friend Neil Talbot has created something in that regard. It's taken a while for us to test it because it wasn't easy. But I also will hope to put that on Patreon either tomorrow or the day after. So look out for that there as well. Again, it'll be free. And the idea is just in these odd times that we find ourselves in to give you something to amuse your brains. Yeah, I think these two things together certainly will do that. Right, now how does Little Killer Sudoku work? Well, very easy. You can see we've got a 14 clue here. Well, that means that those 4 clues along the arrow have to add up to 14. You can repeat digits in the sum, so it's not possible for those 2 digits to be the same. Obviously, they're in the same 3x3 box. But this digit could be the same as that digit, could be the same as that digit. That's absolutely possible. And that's all there is to it. So apart from that, we just have to fill the grid. Now, Phistomefel's puzzles are not normally easy. This one is rated 3 out of 5, so perhaps not as hard as some, but I doubt this will be a walk in the park. They tend to have a very narrow solution path, and it's our job to find it. So with that, let's get cracking. If you want to have a go, click on the link under the video, and that will take you to this web page where you can play along. Now, how shall we start this? So if we look at the clues around the edge, I'm looking for a clue that might be a bit restricted, and I'm not really seeing much. There's a 40 clue here in 6 cells, but that's still not that restricted. It could be, you know, these 3 digits could add up to 24, these add up to 16, or vice versa. And there's no restriction on the 16 there that's meaningful. So I don't think we're going to get anything out of a single clue here. So one thing we could look at is a trick I've seen before with Little Killer Sudokus, and that's to combine. If we combine the 13 and the 24 clue here, that adds up to 37. So that means these digits here have to add up to 37. Now, why is this an interesting pattern? Well, you can see in this 3x3 box here, 5 of the yellow cells are all in the same box. These 5 cells are all in the same box, therefore they cannot be the same digit. And 30, it's not quite going to work, but if we make all these different and as low as possible, we'd have 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5. Well, that's equal to 15. So do the same thing over there, that's 30. And that means this digit has to be 7 or less because it's a 37 total, but that's not actually a very good restriction. Let's try the same thing in these clues at the top, therefore. So that's going to be these ones, isn't it? So again, now we've got to make these equal to 73. So these need to be big. So for how big can we make these 5 digits? Well, I can make them equal 35 if I use 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So these would also be 35, which means this square has to be 3 or larger. Again, that is not going to be the way into the puzzle. So we're going to have to I'm going to have to do something else here. Let's try highlighting all three of them this time. See if that presents any ideas. So now these yellow squares would have to sum up to 61. Maybe. So I'm just wondering here, if we look at this box, in fact I should have left the highlighting there. Let's highlight the squares. I think that will make it easier to see what I'm thinking. So if we look at this box here, we know that the total for this box will be 45, sorry, because we've got the numbers from 1 to 9. If you add them up, you get 45. But these two boxes together, therefore, will add up to 90. Now, in order to create this 61 sum, using these two boxes as our sort of benchmark, you can see we need to deduct out of 90 those 4 squares and then add on top of 90 those 4 squares. And this is a restriction, actually. It is worth thinking about this, because given that we start from the number 90 and the red squares have to be added, these blue squares are going to have to be massive in order to allow us to get down to a total of 61. So if we make these two blue squares as big as possible, they could be 8 and 9, which add up to 17. Do the same here, that would be 34. So 90 minus 34 is 56. Yes, okay, it's 56. So then these squares have to add up to 5 or less. I suppose we could make one of these a 9 and a 7, and that would give 57, which would mean all of the red squares would have to be equal to 1 in order to make sure that the total was 61. Right, so these red squares have to be either a 1 or a 2, and 3 of them have to be a 1. And these squares have to be big, and there always has to be a 9 in one of these two squares, because if we go with 7 and 8, even if this was 8 and 9, we can't make these squares low enough. So there's definitely a 9 in one of those two squares, there's definitely a 9 in one of those two squares, and this is 7, 8, 9, this is 7, 8, 9. And then I guess we should do the same thing, should we, with these 3 clues? Let's get rid of the highlighting and see if that's going to be useful. So, oops. So now these 3 squares, or these 3 clues I should say, we've got 119. So the yellow squares add to 119, but again we've got the same thing going on, haven't we? If we start with the 2 45 squares and deduct out these squares and add in these squares, we need to get from 90 to 119. So this time we need, this time we need these to be tiny, because even if these weren't here, even if we make all of the blue squares equal to 0, then the red squares would still then have to equal 29, which is already quite a large total. But once we start making these blue squares positive numbers, we're making these red squares very restricted. So if we make these 1s and 2s again, these would add up to 3, these would add up to 3, so 90 minus 6 is 84. 84 to 119 is 35. Oh yeah, okay, so these red squares need to add up to 35 or more. Well, there's only one way they could add up to more, and that's if they were all equal to 9. So there are 3 9s and an 8, or 4 9s in these squares. That is quite beautiful. So now there must be a 1 in one of those 2 squares, and in one of those 2 squares. These squares have got to be 1, 2, or 3. These squares have got to be 1, 2, or 3. And if we use a 3, we can only use 1 3. And if we do use a 3, all of these have to be equal to 9. Right, so there we go. At least we've got some, we haven't got any digits in the grid, but we have got some pencil marks. Well, and this can't be a 9, because if this is a 9, both of these have to be 8. But I know that 3 of these have to be equal to 9. So if this, I can't have 2 of them being 8. This is not 9. This is 9. This is, now that's 8 therefore. So once we've got 1 8, the rest of these have to all equal 9 again. Okay, so we've got some digits now going on. That's 8, sorry, I don't know why. I think I just... And because the total for these 4 cells is now 35, that means these squares have all got to be absolute minimums. There is no room for a 3 anymore. These are 1s and 2s. Which means we've got 1, 2 pairs everywhere. But this can't, no, this can't be a 1 either, because if this is a 1, these 2 become 2, and this other clue breaks, the 61 clue breaks. We know we had to get from 56 to 61, so there was a maximum. The maximum we could make these 4 squares was 5. If we have 2 2s and 2 1s, that's equal to 6. So this has to not equal 1. This is a 2, which means that's a 1 and that's a 2. That's a 1 and that's a 2. These are both 1s now. And we haven't got 4 1s now. We've got a 2. So now this has to be a 1 as well, because that we know from 56, we're looking at 56 to 61. We need 5. We can't do the 4 1s anymore. So if we can't do the 4 1s, we can't have a 7. So this has to be an 8. And this has to be a 9, and this has to be an 8. And okay, so now we have some digits, and we have symmetry. In fact, we do have symmetry. If we come down, if I imagine a line cutting the grid like this, where the cursor's moving, the 1s and 9s all switch around that line. Look at that. And the 2s and 8s switch around the line as well. Okay, I'm not sure if that's important, but I have noticed it. So let's carry on. Now we've got some, must be a 1 in one of those 2 squares. That square's got to be a 9, look, because of the 9s here. That square's got to be a 1. So again, that's preserved the symmetry. And then, yeah, look, the 9s are locked into one of those 2 squares. So that's a 1 9 pair at the bottom. So now we probably have to use one of the clues again. So 14, these have to be equal to 11, 24, 14, so, is that 14? Yeah. And 26, 20. Okay, I'm not seeing much we can do with the top. Let's try these ones. 13. Yeah, there you go. Those 2 squares are interesting because there's a 1 and a 2 already in this box. Therefore, the minimum I could make these 2 squares is 7. if I put 3 and 4, 3 plus 4 is 7, plus 1 is 8. These two squares now have to equal 5 in order to get to 13 without using a 1. So these two squares have got to be 2 and 3. There's a 2 over there. So that's a 2, that's a 3. Now there's a 2 in one of those two squares. Yes. Now look at the 24 clue. The bottom 24 clue here. We've already got 4 in the diagonal. So these 4 squares have got to add up to 20. But this one, the minimum I could make those two squares would be 11 with a 5 and a 6. And the minimum I could make those two squares would be 9 with a 4 and a 5. So these are 5 and 6 here and 4 and 5 here. So these are 6 and 7 to complete the box. And this is a 7 because that's the only thing that is going in that cell in its 3x3 box. Let's check the sum and the diagonal. Yeah, that's adding to 24. So now we've basically used these clues. And the 40 clue is forced. We've got 24 there, plus 9 is 33. These two clues have got to add up to 7 without using a 2 and without using a 1. So the only way left is going to be with a 3 and a 4. 3 over here. So that's a 4, that's a 3. So let's have a look at the 33 clue now. We need to make these equal to 20. Well, these equal to 24. So, right. So if we make these two squares as big as possible, we could make them as high as 10 with a 6 here and a 4 here. That means these squares have to be a minimum of 14, which means they must include an 8 because they can't include a 9. And there's an 8 there. So this is an 8. This must be a 6 or a 7 to get to 14 or 15. So this is a 5 to complete the row. That means this is a 5 and this is a 6. This 5 means this couldn't have been equal to 10 anymore. So I think this has to be a 7 and this has to be a 4. Let's just check that. 33. So we've got 22. We need these two to equal 11. Yeah, this has got to equal a 7. That's got to equal a 4. That's a 3. These two squares have got to be a 5 and a 6. Seven here, look. Means there's a 7 in one of those squares. A 7 down there. 3s as well, look. Lock a 3 into one of those two positions. So there's a 3 down here as well. 3's over there. So 3's down here. So far, there's weird symmetry going on. So 9's, 2's, 8's, 7's and 3's look like they might be symmetrical. Or maybe not with this 7-3 though. This 7 here obviously forces this to be a 6-7 pair. Ah, and the 7's now interact here and force set. So we've got 3, 7. There's definitely something with the 3's and the 7's. Must be a 7 in one of those two squares. Oh, now if we look down this column, we still need to place a 2 and an 8 in this column, and there's a 2 and an 8 in this row. So this square can't be a 2 or an 8, so the only spaces that could be 2 and an 8 are those two, which means that square must be a 3 to complete the column. So now we've used these three. We haven't used the 14 clue yet. So 14 clue, we need these two squares to add up to 11 without being 2, 9, without being 7, 4. So this is either 5, 6 or 3, 8. And we have 3 and 5 there. So this square must be a 3 or a 5. This square must be an 8 or a 6. 18 clue here. These squares have got to add up to 15. I don't see how to do that. And 16, 7 might be interesting. So that these three squares have got to add up to 9. Well, this can't be a 7 anymore, because that would require those two squares to both equal 1, and that one can't be a 1. So this is not 7. And we've got a 1, 2 and a 3 in column 6 already. So this has got to be 4 or higher. Yeah, okay. So if this is anything higher than a 4, we have to repeat the 1. So if this was a 5, for example, these two squares would have to add up to 4, and that would have to be 1 and 3, which breaks. And if this is 6, these would have to be 1 and 2, and that's also obviously also impossible. So this square is a 4, which means one of these two squares is a 4. And 11, these two have to add up to 5 without using 1. So these are 2 and 3, and there's a 3 there. So 3, 2, get rid of those 3 pencil marks. 2's now mean this is a 2. This must be a 5 or a 7 because of the 4 here. This must be 4, 5 or 7. This 2 sees the 2 and the 8 here, look. So now this must be an 8. This is a 2. Whoops. This is an 8 now by normal Sudoku rules, these 8's interacting. So this square must be a 4 or a 6, looking at the row, and this 5 at the top there. 5, 6, 7. So these three squares are 5, 6 and 7 in some order. Okay, and we've used, the only clue we've not used yet is the 18 clue, I think. Oh, 1s. I can pencil mark some 1s over here. Twos I can pencil mark down here. And down here. Threes must be in one of those two squares. Right, let's have a look at this diagonal then. So this square can't be 1, 2, it can't be 3, the 3's are locked in here, and it can't be 7, 8 or 9. So this square is a 4, 5 or a 6. Oh. And this square, look, can only be, I think this square can only be 3, 5 or 6. Just comparing the contents of the row and the column. So look, there's a 3, 5, 6 triple there. So this square can't be a 5 or a 6. That square is a 4. That square is not a 4. That gives us a 5, 7 pair here now. So this square must be a 4. That's a 5. That's a 5. That's a 6. This is a 4. That's can't be 5 anymore. So these two squares are 6 and 7. And what can we do next? 7. In this box we still need to place 4, 6, 8 and 9. So there's an 8 in one of those two, a 4 in one of these two, and we don't know about 6 and 9 yet. But coming back to this 18 clue, so we've got 3 and 4, so these two have to add up to 11. Well, this can't be a 3 because that would place an 8 there. So what can this be? It can be 3, 6, 7 or 8. We've just said it can't be a 3, so it's got to be 6, 7 or 8. Is there anything restricting any of those? So for 6, 7 or 8, this square has to be... it can't be a 5, so this can't be a 6. It can't be a 7 because the 4 would have to go here. So this square is can only be an 8. And these two squares, therefore, are a 3, 7 pair. This is an 8 down here. So to complete this, this must be a 3, which means this is a 2. Oh, now we're starting to get somewhere. Now we are starting to get somewhere. That fixes the 3 and the 7 there, which fixes the 7 and the 5. This must be a 2. Still not put a 1 into this box. This 8 sees that. That's got to be a 6. That forces a 6 up there, look. This 6 is on the 14 diagonal, so now this must be a 5. That forces this to be a 5. That means that's a 5. These two squares have got to be 1 and 6, which is now resolvable. That's a 6, that's a 1, that's a 1, that's a 9. This is a 9. That's got to be a 6 now, which fixes the 7s and the 6s in the middle. These two squares have got to be 4 and 6, which might not be resolvable yet. That can't be a 5 now, or a 6. So that top square there is a 3. Which fixes that to be a 3. Oh, we're so close to finishing, I think. Now these squares have got to be 1, 4 and 7. So the 1 must go there. That must be the 4. That's a 7. And that should be an 8. Yes, that looks okay. The 7 here fixes this 7. I think we're almost done, aren't we? So 4 and 9 into these squares. You can see that's resolvable. That fixes the 4 and the 6 at the bottom. That gives us a 6 here, and hopefully a 5. Looks good. Check. Can't see. Yes. That's how to solve it. What a beautiful puzzle as always from Phistomefel. Fabulous. Let me know what you thought, obviously in the comments, and we'll be back later on tonight with another edition of Cracking the Cryptic.